The police arrived at exactly 3:17 a.m. Not 3:16. Not 3:18. 3:17. That detail would later become important. The call had come in just minutes earlier. Short. Distorted. Almost like someone didn't have time to finish what they were trying to say. When officers pulled up to the house, nothing seemed out of place. No broken windows. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels wrong. They approached the front door. It was locked. From the inside. That's when things stopped making sense. Because when they finally got in, what they found inside that house should have been impossible. The victim was already there. Lying on the floor. Cold. Still. Dead. But according to official records, that same person had already been declared dead 2 days earlier. This is Midnight Tales, where real cases don't just stay unsolved. They get darker the deeper you look. And some stories were never meant to be understood. October 2018. Fall had just settled in. The kind of season where the air turns cold enough to notice, but not cold enough to keep people inside. Leaves covered the sidewalks. Streetlights flickered on earlier than usual. And in this particular neighborhood, life moved exactly the way it always had. Quiet. Predictable. Safe. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors until late at night. Where neighbors waved at each other but didn't ask too many questions. Where nothing unusual ever really happened. And that's exactly why this case still doesn't make sense. Because this wasn't the kind of place where something like this should ever happen. Not here. Not to someone like Daniel Reeves. Daniel had lived in that neighborhood for nearly 7 years. He wasn't rich. He wasn't struggling. He was just normal. He worked as a high school teacher. History. The kind of teacher students respected, but didn't necessarily remember. He showed up on time. He left on time. He kept his life simple. Structured. No drama. No enemies. No secrets, at least none that anyone knew about. His neighbors described him the same way. Quiet. Polite. Reserved. He kept to himself, but not in a way that felt strange. Just private. The kind of person who would help you carry groceries, but wouldn't stay long enough to talk. He had a routine. Every morning, he left his house at exactly 7:40 a.m. Every evening, he returned just before sunset. On weekends, he stayed home. Sometimes reading. Sometimes grading papers. Nothing about his life stood out. And maybe that's what makes this story so unsettling. Because when something finally did happen, there was no warning. No build-up. No sign that anything was wrong. Just one night. Where everything changed. And what makes this case different, what makes it stay with people, isn't just how Daniel Reeves died. It's what happened after. Because whatever happened in that house didn't end when he died. If anything, that's when it started. It began at exactly 2:46 in the morning. Most of the neighborhood was asleep. Lights off. Streets empty. Nothing moving. That's when the call came in. A woman who lived 2 houses down from Daniel reported hearing something unusual. At first, she wasn't even sure what it was. She said it sounded like a voice. But not a conversation. Not yelling. Just a single scream. Short. Sharp. Like it had been cut off before it could fully happen. She waited. Listening. Expecting something else. Another sound. A crash. Movement. But there was nothing. Just silence. And not the normal kind. Not the quiet you get in the middle of the night. This was different. This felt heavy. Like the entire street had just stopped. She later told police she almost didn't call. That she stood by her window for nearly a full minute, trying to convince herself it was nothing. A dream. A TV. Anything that made more sense than what she thought she heard. But something didn't feel right. So she made the call. Police were dispatched immediately. And within minutes, they arrived. When officers pulled up outside Daniel Reeves' house, everything looked normal. No lights on. No movement inside. No signs that anything had happened at all. They approached carefully. Knocked on the front door. No response. They knocked again. Still nothing. That's when one of the officers tried the handle. Locked. They circled the house. Checked the windows. All secured. No broken glass. No forced entry. Nothing out of place. If something had happened inside, there was no visible way in. And no visible way out. That's when they made the decision to enter. But before they did, one of the officers noticed something. At first, he couldn't explain it. He just paused. Took a step back. And then said it out loud. There was a smell. Faint. But unmistakable. Not strong enough to identify immediately. But just enough to make you stop. The kind of smell that doesn't belong. The kind that tells you something is wrong. And as soon as they forced their way inside, that feeling only got worse. They stepped inside, slowly. Not rushing. Not speaking. Just listening. The kind of listening you only do when something doesn't feel right. Every movement echoed more than it should have. Every step felt louder. Heavier. Like the house itself was responding. The air inside was different. Still. Thick. Almost difficult to breathe. One officer called out. Police. No answer. Not even an echo. They moved through the living room first. Everything was exactly where it should be. Furniture untouched. No signs of a struggle. No broken objects. Nothing overturned. It looked like someone had simply left. Or never been there at all. They checked the kitchen next. Clean. Too clean. No dishes in the sink. No food left out. No sign that anyone had been there recently. But that didn't match the call. Someone heard a scream. And it came from this house. So they kept moving. Down the hallway. Step by step. Door by door. Each one opened. Each one empty. Until they reached the last door. At the end of the hall. The bedroom. Something about it felt different. No sound. No movement. Just silence. Deeper than the rest of the house. One of the officers reached for the handle. And stopped. It wouldn't move. Locked. From the inside. They looked at each other. No forced entry. No way out. And yet, someone had called this in. They knocked. No response. They knocked again. Still nothing. That's when they made the decision. They forced it open. The door gave way suddenly. A sharp crack breaking through the silence. And for a moment, no one moved. Because what they saw inside didn't register right away. It took a second. Maybe two. For the brain to catch up with the eyes. One officer stepped back. Immediately. Not because of what was there. But because of what didn't make sense. Daniel Reeves. was lying on the floor. On his back. Completely still. No movement. No sign of life. His skin looked pale. Cold. Not recently cold. But the kind of cold that had been there for a while. Too long. His eyes were slightly open. Not wide. Just enough to make it unsettling. Like he had been looking at something. Right before everything stopped. The room itself showed no signs of violence. No struggle. No overturned furniture. No blood. Nothing that explained what had happened. It was quiet. Too quiet. And then one of the officers said something. Something small. But it changed everything. He recognized the name. Daniel Reeves. He had heard it before. Not from this call. From a report. A recent one. Just 2 days earlier. At first, no one said anything. Because it didn't make sense. But then they checked. They called it in. Ran the records. And what came back? Didn't just confuse them. It disturbed them. Because according to official records, Daniel Reeves had already been declared dead 48 hours earlier. Same name. Same date of birth. Same address. Same person. No mistake. No mix-up. The report was real. Filed. Confirmed. Signed. Which meant one thing. The man lying on that bedroom floor shouldn't have been there. Not alive. Not dead. Not at all. Because as far as the system was concerned, he was already gone. So the question became, if Daniel Reeves died 2 days earlier, then who was inside that room? And more importantly, who made that call? By sunrise, the case had already changed. What started as a routine call was now something no one could explain. Detectives were brought in immediately. Not just local officers, but experienced investigators. People who had seen everything. Or at least, thought they had. The first step was simple. Verify the facts. Confirm the identity. Make sure there hadn't been some kind of mistake. Because that's what this had to be. A paperwork error. A mix-up. Something human. Something explainable. They started with hospital records. 2 days earlier, a man named Daniel Reeves had been pronounced dead. The report was detailed. Time of death recorded. Cause of death listed. Signed by a medical professional. There was even a witness. Someone who had identified the body. Everything checked out. No inconsistencies. No missing information. It was clean. Official. Final. And yet, here he was again. In his own house. On his bedroom floor. They pushed deeper. Requested access to the morgue report. Verified the body that had been processed. Fingerprints matched. Identification confirmed. There was no doubt about it. The man who died 2 days earlier was Daniel Reeves. Which meant the man found in that bedroom couldn't be. But he was. And that's where things started to fall apart. Because the deeper they looked, the less anything made sense. Then came the next problem. Daniel's phone. It had been recovered from the scene. Lying just a few feet away from his body. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Until they checked the activity. The last known use. The timestamps. And that's when everything shifted again. Because Daniel's phone was still active. Not before his death. Not leading up to it. But after. Calls. Data usage. Movement. All recorded. All real. All happening after he had already been declared dead. At first, they assumed it had to be someone else. Someone using his phone. But that raised a new question. Who? There was no sign of forced entry. No sign anyone else had been in that house. No fingerprints. No footprints. Nothing. So if someone had been using his phone, they had been inside that locked house. With him. And somehow, they had disappeared. But that wasn't even the strangest part. Because when detectives dug deeper into the phone's data, they found something they couldn't ignore. Something hidden. Buried beneath everything else. Something that shouldn't have existed at all. It wasn't obvious at first. It didn't stand out. Just a single file, sitting among dozens of others. Almost overlooked. Until someone noticed the timestamp. 3:12 a.m. Just minutes before the police arrived. That alone didn't make sense. Because by that time, Daniel Reeves was already dead. Or at least, he was supposed to be. They opened the file. It was a voice recording. Short. Distorted. Barely clear enough to understand. At first, all they heard was static. Low. Uneven. Like interference. Then, a voice. Faint. Weak. Struggling. It didn't sound like someone speaking normally. It sounded like someone trying to. Forcing the words out. And then it became clear. The voice said, "It's not me." A pause. Long enough to feel uncomfortable. Like something was missing. Then again. Quieter this time. Almost like a warning. It's still inside. And then the recording ended. No background noise. No movement. Just silence. For a moment, no one said anything. Because no one knew what to say. The voice. It sounded like Daniel. Not exactly. But close enough. Close enough to make it worse. Because if that really was him, then the timeline didn't just break. It collapsed completely. The recording was made after his reported death. But before police arrived. Inside a locked house. With no one else present. And that meant one thing. Either Daniel Reeves wasn't the one who died 2 days earlier. Or something else. Had been inside that house with him. Something that could move. Something that could speak. Something that knew exactly what was happening. And if that voice was telling the truth, then whatever was inside that house that night was still there. Not gone. Not finished. Still inside. Officially. The case was ruled inconclusive. No suspects. No clear cause. No explanation that could hold up under scrutiny. Just a file, closed without answers. But behind that single word, inconclusive, were theories. A lot of them. Some investigators believed it was a simple mistake. A rare, but possible mix-up in identity. They argued that the man declared dead 2 days earlier wasn't actually Daniel Reeves. That somewhere along the line, a name had been attached to the wrong body. A clerical error. A human failure. It happens. Not often, but enough to be considered. But that theory didn't hold for long. Because the records were checked. Multiple times. Fingerprints. Dental records. Official identification. Everything matched. There was no mistake. The man who died 2 days earlier was Daniel Reeves. And that made the second theory even harder to believe. Some thought the entire thing had been staged. That someone had planned it. Carefully. Deliberately. They suggested that Daniel had somehow faked his death, only to return. But that raised more questions than answers. Why would he come back, just to die again? How did he get into a locked house, with no sign of entry? And if someone else was involved, where did they go? Because no one was seen leaving. No evidence was found. Nothing was taken. Nothing was left behind. It was as if, whatever happened in that room, was never meant to be understood. But there was a third group. The ones who didn't offer theories. The ones who stopped talking about it entirely. Officers who were there that night. The first to enter. The first to see. They were questioned. Individually. Multiple times. At first, they spoke. Carefully. Measured. Sticking to facts. But over time, that changed. Some refused follow-up interviews. Others requested reassignment. One officer reportedly left the force entirely, just weeks later. No official reason was ever given. But those who worked with him said the same thing. He wasn't the same after that night. None of them were. And none of them ever returned to that house. Not even once. Today, the house still stands. Right where it always was. Same street. Same neighborhood. Same quiet surroundings. From the outside, nothing about it looks unusual. The lawn still grows. The paint hasn't faded much. The windows are intact. It doesn't look abandoned. It doesn't look damaged. It just looks untouched. Like time stopped there. Neighbors still live nearby. They still pass the house every day. They still see it. But they don't talk about it. Not openly. Not directly. And they don't go near it. Not anymore. Not after everything that happened. But it's not just the history that keeps them away. It's not just the story. It's what came after. Because every now and then, usually late at night, when everything else is quiet, when the street is empty, and the lights are out, some of them say they hear something. Not loud. Not clear. Just enough to notice. A sound. From inside the house. Movement. Slow. Subtle. Like footsteps. Crossing a room that should be empty. Some say it's just the house settling. Old wood. Loose pipes. Natural sounds. But the people who've heard it don't seem convinced. Because the sounds don't repeat. They don't follow a pattern. And they don't happen every night. Only sometimes. Only when it's quiet enough to hear them. And always. From inside. A house that no one has entered. Since that night. A house where the last person found inside wasn't supposed to be there at all. And if what was recorded on that phone is true, if that voice was real, then whatever was inside that house that night never left. It's still there. Waiting. In the silence. Behind a door that no one has opened again. So here's the question. If Daniel Reeves was officially declared dead 2 days before the police ever arrived, if his body had already been identified, processed, and recorded, then the person found inside that bedroom couldn't have been him. But it was. Same face. Same fingerprints. Same identity. No difference. No explanation. So now you're left with something much worse than a mystery. You're left with a choice. Either the system got it wrong. Every record, every confirmation, every single detail. Or something happened inside that house that no one has been able to explain. Something that doesn't follow logic. Something that doesn't follow rules. And if you listen carefully to that recording, if you really pay attention to what that voice said, it's not me. It's still inside. Then maybe the real question isn't about Daniel Reeves at all. Maybe the real question is this. If that wasn't him, then what was it? And more importantly, what was still inside that house when the police walked in? Because whatever it was, it knew how to speak. It knew how to hide. And somehow, it knew exactly what was coming next. So I'll ask you one last time. If he died 2 days earlier, then who was inside that room? Or better yet, what? Now think about it. And tell me what you believe really happened. Because this case was never solved. And maybe it never will be.